The morning sun filtered through the barracks window as Sergeant Sarah Mitchell stared at her reflection in the small mirror bolted to the concrete wall. At 34 years old, she had spent 11 years in the United States Army. Her face was weathered from years of desert deployments, field exercises, and the constant pressure of proving herself in a world that still questioned whether women belonged in uniform. She pulled her blonde hair back into the regulation bun, tucking the loose strands carefully behind her ears. Her blue eyes, sharp and alert, looked back at her with a weariness that only came from decades of being told she wasn't good enough. Sarah had served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. She had trained younger soldiers, planned logistics for entire companies, and saved lives in combat situations. Yet somehow, none of it seemed to matter much when officers walked into a room. The alarm on her phone buzzed at 600 hours. It was Monday, March 10, 2008. Sarah dressed quickly in her Army combat uniform, the tan and brown camouflage pattern now familiar as her own skin. She was a supply sergeant, responsible for managing food, ammunition, and medical supplies for the entire 2nd Battalion stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It was detailed work, meticulous work. It required attention to every single item, every receipt, every inventory sheet. Sarah was brilliant at it. But no one seemed to care. She walked into the mess hall at 6:30 hours. The facility was already bustling with activity. Young soldiers, mostly men, moved about their tasks with varying degrees of focus. Some looked at her with respect. Others simply looked through her as if she were invisible. "Sergeant Mitchell," came a voice from across the room. It was Private First Class James Chen, barely 23 years old, one of the newer recruits. He was struggling with a heavy box of ration cases. "Can you give me a hand here?" Sarah dropped her bag and moved to help him without hesitation. Together, they shifted the box onto a shelf in the storage room. James looked at her with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said. "You always help out even when it's not your job." Sarah smiled at him. "That's what we do, Private. We take care of each other." As she was turning to leave, Captain Robert Halston entered the storage room. He was in his mid-40s, with the build of a man who spent more time in the officers' club than in training. He had been stationed at Fort Bragg for 8 months, and in that time he had made Sarah's job significantly harder. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, his tone suggesting annoyance before he even opened his mouth. "I've been looking for you." "Sir," Sarah responded, standing at attention. "The supplies for the training exercise in 2 weeks are behind schedule," Halston said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I need an explanation." Sarah had anticipated this conversation. She had the answer prepared, complete with documentation. "Sir, the supplies were delayed by the vendor," she explained clearly. "I've already filed a complaint with procurement and expedited the order. We will have everything in stock by March 20th, which gives us 4 days before the exercise begins. I have the documentation in my office." Halston waved his hand dismissively. "Your job is to make sure we have what we need when we need it. I don't want to hear excuses about vendors. I want results." Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Understood, sir. The supplies will be here on time." "See that they are," Halston said, turning to leave. As he passed Private Chen, he nodded slightly. To the young man who had done nothing but accept Sarah's help, the captain offered a moment of acknowledgement. To Sarah, who had solved the entire problem and would have supplies ready before deadline, he offered nothing but criticism. After he left, Sarah exhaled slowly. She had learned years ago that reacting emotionally in these moments only proved the critics right. If she got angry, she was too emotional. If she got sad, she was not cut out for military life. If she fought back, she was difficult. So Sarah had become a master of the blank face, the steady voice, the professional demeanor that revealed nothing of the frustration churning inside her. "Sergeant," Private Chen said softly, "he's not fair to you." "That's okay, Private," Sarah said, managing a genuine smile. "Life's not always fair, but we do our jobs anyway. That's what separates soldiers from civilians. We do what needs to be done regardless of the recognition we get." The words were true, but they didn't make the situation any less irritating. Sarah spent the rest of the day in her office. A small room with military green walls, a metal desk, and filing cabinets crammed full of inventory sheets. She verified every single order, followed up with vendors personally, and reorganized the entire supply schedule to ensure nothing would fall behind again. By 1800 hours, she had made 3 phone calls, sent 2 emails, and rearranged 4 different shipments. The supplies would be there on time. As she was packing up to leave, there was a knock on her door frame. It was Major Lisa Hendricks, one of the few female officers at the base and someone Sarah genuinely respected. "Working late again?" Major Hendricks asked, stepping into the office. "Just making sure everything's on track, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I heard Halston came down on you about the supply situation," Hendricks said, sitting on the corner of Sarah's desk. "I want you to know that I don't operate that way. Your work is exceptional. I've reviewed your records, and you're one of the most reliable people on this base." Sarah felt her shoulders relax slightly. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that." "How much longer are you planning to stay in?" Hendricks asked. 7 more years, ma'am," Sarah answered. "I want to make it to 20 and get my pension." Hendricks nodded. "You'll make it. And Sarah, don't let people like Halston make you question yourself. You're a damn good soldier." After the major left, Sarah sat alone in her office for a moment. She thought about her life, about the choices that had led her to this small room in a military base in North Carolina. She came from a military family. Her father had been a Marine, her grandfather an Army officer. Service wasn't just something she did, it was something she was. But lately, she had begun to wonder if service was enough. If being good at your job, if being reliable and dedicated, if keeping your word and showing up every single day would ever be enough to earn the respect she craved. She didn't have an answer to that question. That night, Sarah drove back to her small apartment off base. She lived alone. There had been a marriage once years ago, but it hadn't survived 2 tours in Iraq. Her ex-husband simply couldn't accept that her commitment to the military superseded her commitment to him. There had been other relationships, but nothing had lasted. It was hard to maintain a personal life when your job demanded everything from you. She cooked herself a simple dinner, grilled chicken and rice, and ate it while watching the evening news. The world was in turmoil. The housing market was collapsing. The economy was in freefall. The war in Iraq and Afghanistan continued with no end in sight. Sarah had friends deployed right now, putting their lives on the line while the economy crumbled at home and nobody seemed to care. She went to bed early, as she did most nights, her mind already planning tomorrow's tasks. The supplies would be verified. The inventory sheets would be updated. She would make sure everything was perfect. What she didn't know was that in just 2 weeks, her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The following Monday morning, Sarah received an email that would alter the course of everything. It was from Major Hendricks, marked urgent. The message was brief. "Need to see you in my office immediately. Bring your personnel file." Sarah's heart began to race. In the military, an urgent summons combined with a request for your personnel file could mean many things, most of them not good. She gathered her file and headed to Hendricks' office, her mind running through possibilities. Had she made an error in the supply counts? Was there an audit? Or worse, was she being passed over for promotion again? When she entered Hendricks' office, she found the major looking unusually serious. But there was something else there too. Something that looked like excitement. "Close the door, Sarah," Hendricks said. "Sit down. I have an opportunity to discuss with you, but first, I need to know if you're willing to take on something completely different from what you've done before." Sarah sat, her military bearing perfect, her face neutral. "Ma'am." "There's a special assignment," Hendricks continued. "It's a cultural and humanitarian mission. You'd be working with a small team of soldiers to distribute supplies and aid to civilians in Germany. It's not combat. It's not even technically active duty in the traditional sense. But it would require you to lead a team, work independently, and interact directly with civilians in a war-torn region." Sarah's mind immediately began cataloging questions. Germany? There was no active conflict in Germany, not directly anyway, but her instinct told her to listen first, ask later. "The project came down from the Joint Chiefs of Staff," Hendricks explained. "They're sending teams to various locations where American military presence has affected civilian populations. Germany is one of them. Our base there received a request for assistance from a small town outside Stuttgart. They're dealing with a serious food shortage affecting children especially. The Army is assembling teams to help. I'm recommending you to lead a team of 5 soldiers. You'd oversee supply distribution, work with local authorities, and document the mission for military records. It's a chance to make a real difference, Sarah. And frankly, it's also a chance to show what you're capable of beyond these base logistics." Sarah's immediate instinct was to accept, but she had learned to pause, to think things through before responding. "How long would I be deployed, ma'am?" she asked. 3 months, Hendricks replied. "You'd leave at the end of March and return at the end of June." Sarah did the math quickly. It was enough time to make a real difference. It was also enough time to miss the promotion cycle for May, but promotions had never worked out for her anyway. "I'll do it, ma'am," Sarah said without hesitation. "Who are the other soldiers on the team?" "I'm leaving that up to you," Hendricks said, smiling slightly. "Choose people you trust, soldiers who are reliable and who you think can handle working in a civilian environment." As Sarah left the office, her mind was already working. This was an opportunity, not just to serve, but to lead. To prove that she was capable of more than managing inventory sheets on a North Carolina military base. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to encounter a story that would define her entire life. A story about hunger, poverty, sacrifice, and the incredible strength of human kindness in the darkest times. The town of Schlossberg, Germany, was like something from another era. Nestled in a valley between two forested hills about 40 miles south of Stuttgart, it had a population of barely 3,000 people. The main street was lined with buildings that dated back to the 1800s, their stone facades weathered by time and circumstance. The town square featured a fountain that hadn't flowed with water in decades, and a small church with a white steeple that still held services on Sundays. To most American tourists who traveled through Germany, Schlossberg would be invisible. Too small, too out of the way, too ordinary to warrant attention. But appearances were deeply misleading. Sarah arrived with her team on April 1, 2008. The journey had taken nearly 24 hours, and everyone was exhausted. Her team consisted of 5 soldiers: Sergeant Michael Torres, a logistics specialist like herself; Corporal Jennifer Bradley, a medical officer; Private First Class David Morrison, a communications expert; Private Marcus Williams, a general supply handler; and Private Amanda Foster, who was technically the newest member of the team but had impressed Sarah with her genuine desire to help people rather than just complete her military service. They had been assigned to stay in a small, converted military barracks about 2 miles outside the main town. The facility was basic but functional, dormitory-style sleeping quarters, a small kitchen, and a communications room where they could file daily reports back to Stuttgart. On that first morning, Sarah arranged a meeting with the town's local government representative, Herr Klaus Mueller. He was a thin man in his 60s with graying hair and sad eyes. He spoke English with a thick accent, but his meaning was clear enough. "Thank you for coming," Mueller said, his voice thick with emotion. We have tried everything, but the situation gets worse." "Can you walk us through what's happening?" Sarah asked, pulling out a notebook. Over the next hour, Mueller explained the situation. The global recession had hit Schlossberg harder than most towns. The manufacturing plant that had employed nearly 40% of the town's workforce had closed 2 years earlier, moving operations to Eastern Europe. The local businesses that depended on those workers had collapsed. Young people left for Stuttgart and Berlin, seeking opportunities elsewhere. What remained was an aging population and families with few resources. More critically, the government assistance programs that existed in larger cities barely reached Schlossberg. The bureaucratic systems were overwhelmed, and a small town didn't have the political clout to demand attention. Children were going to school hungry. Some days, parents skipped meals so their children could eat. Malnutrition was becoming visible in the younger generation: hollow cheeks, slow growth, lethargy. "We have applied for help from Berlin," Mueller said, his voice carrying frustration. "But the money takes months to arrive, if it arrives at all. These children, they cannot wait for months. They need help now." Sarah listened carefully, her military mind already assessing resources and creating plans. But her heart was responding to something else. The genuine despair in this man's voice, the weight of responsibility he carried for an entire community. "We'll help," Sarah said simply. "That's why we're here." What Sarah didn't anticipate was just how deep the crisis ran. That afternoon, she took a walk through the town with Herr Mueller. The streets were quiet. The few shops that remained open looked like they were barely surviving. But what struck Sarah most powerfully was when Mueller led her to the elementary school. The school was a modest 2-story building that had probably been handsome once. Now its paint was peeling, its windows needed cleaning, and through the open doors, Sarah could hear children singing, slightly off-key, but with genuine enthusiasm. The sound of children's voices, always energetic and full of life, made her smile despite the poverty around them. "Would you like to meet the children?" Mueller asked. Sarah nodded and they stepped inside. The classroom they entered held about 20 children ranging from 6 to 9 years old. Their teacher, Frau Greta Hoffmann, was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and the tired expression of someone carrying an impossible burden. She stopped mid-lesson when she saw Sarah in her army uniform. "Frau Hoffmann, this is Sergeant Mitchell," Mueller explained in German, then switched to English for Sarah's benefit. "She is here to help us." The teacher's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and skepticism. The children stared at Sarah with intense curiosity, many of them having never seen an American soldier before. "Class, this is Sergeant Sarah Mitchell," Frau Hoffmann said in English, heavily accented but clear. "She is from America. Can you say hello?" 20 small voices chorused hello in varying degrees of accuracy. Sarah smiled at them, and several children smiled back, though many looked uncertain. After a few minutes of conversation, Sarah asked Frau Hoffmann if they could speak privately. The two women stepped into the hallway. "The children," Sarah said carefully, "are they getting enough to eat?" Frau Hoffmann's face fell. She glanced back into the classroom to make sure the children weren't listening. "No," she said simply. "About half of them come to school hungry. Some of them fall asleep during lessons because their bodies are weak. We try. I keep some bread and cheese here, but it is not enough. Their families." She trailed off, and Sarah watched as the teacher's eyes began to water. "Their families are doing everything they can," Hoffmann continued quietly. "The parents are not lazy. They are not bad people. They simply do not have enough money for food after they pay for rent and heat and electricity. In winter, they must choose, feed the children or heat the home. It is an impossible choice." Sarah had spent most of her life in the military, surrounded by discipline and duty and the belief that hard work always paid off. She had been raised on the idea that if you served your country, if you did your job, if you followed the rules, then you would have enough to live on. The reality of Frau Hoffmann's words struck something deep inside her. "We're going to fix this," Sarah said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. That evening, she called together her team and laid out a plan. They would conduct a full assessment of the town's food situation. They would identify all the families with children. They would create a distribution network. And most importantly, they would tap into military supply chains to obtain food, not just the bare minimum, but real food. Vegetables, fruits, proteins, grains, food that would actually nourish these children. "Ma'am," Private Williams said, raising his hand. "The regulations. We're authorized to distribute supplies, but the parameters are specific. We're supposed to focus on minimal nutritional requirements to prevent starvation." Sarah looked at him steadily. "And that's exactly what we'll do. Private, minimal nutritional requirements to prevent starvation. That minimal requirement includes diverse foods that help children grow and develop properly. Unless you're suggesting that children don't need calcium for bones or iron for blood or protein for muscles." Williams grinned and shook his head. "No, ma'am, I was just making sure we were all on the same page." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah's team worked harder than they had during any training exercise. They mapped out the town, identified every family with children under 18, and developed a distribution schedule. They worked with Frau Hoffmann and the other teachers to understand which children needed help most urgently. What emerged was a heartbreaking picture. There were 43 families with children living below the poverty line. That meant approximately 127 children were going to bed hungry on most nights. But these weren't lazy families or broken homes in the stereotypical sense. These were working parents who had lost jobs or single mothers working 2 part-time jobs and still coming up short. These were families that had lived in Schlossberg for generations, that had roots deep in the community, and that had simply been abandoned by a system that couldn't reach them. Sarah also began to understand something else: the shame involved. When she first approached families to offer help, many of them refused. A father who had worked at the factory for 20 years looked at Sarah with tears in his eyes and said, "I should be feeding my children. I do not need charity." It took patience and humility on Sarah's part to help these people understand that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was survival. It was doing whatever it took to keep your children alive and healthy. It was the same principle that governed military strategy: adapt to circumstances, use all available resources, and accomplish the mission. By mid-April, the first shipment of supplies arrived. The boxes and crates were transported to the school, which became the central distribution point. Frau Hoffman and several parent volunteers helped Sarah and her team organize everything. When the supplies were unpacked, there were gasps of amazement. There were pasta and rice. There were canned vegetables and fruits. There were powdered milk and eggs. There were even chocolate bars, not many, but enough that each child could have one. There were basic medical supplies for Corporal Bradley to distribute to families with medical needs. "This is incredible," Frau Hoffman said, her voice shaking. "Sergeant Mitchell, this is incredible." But what happened next made Sarah realize just how profound the need had been. Word spread through the town quickly. By the next afternoon, families began appearing at the school. The first woman was Greta Skalls, mother of 3, who approached Sarah with tears already streaming down her face. "Is this real?" Greta asked in German, which Sergeant Tors translated. "Is this really happening?" "Yes," Sarah said gently. "We're here to help." When Greta was given a box of supplies to take home, when she saw the food and understood it was hers, for her children, she broke down completely. She sat down on the school steps and sobbed, great, heaving sobs of relief. Sarah sat next to her, not saying anything, just being present. Over the next few hours, Sarah witnessed something she had never seen before. She witnessed the profound dignity and human vulnerability. She watched mothers and fathers accept help with gratitude so genuine and so deep that it seemed to transcend language. She saw the moment when hope replaced despair in someone's eyes. By evening, every family had received supplies, and something unexpected happened. As the last family was leaving, an older woman approached Sarah. She was perhaps in her 70s, with white hair and a weathered face. Through Tor's translation, she explained that she was Ilse Hoffman, a widow who lived alone. "I have nothing to give in return," Ilse said quietly, "but I have a memory. During the war, during the terrible times, an American soldier gave food to my mother and me. She never forgot his face. She never forgot his kindness. I have waited my whole life to meet another American who showed kindness, to say thank you to him through you. So I say to you now, thank you. Thank you for remembering that we are all human." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. She reached out and took Ilse's weathered hands in her own. "You remember his face?" Sarah asked softly, "even after all these years?" "Every day," Ilse said. "Every single day, kindness like that. It does not leave you, it becomes part of your soul." That night, Sarah sat in the barracks and wrote in her personal journal. She had kept a journal since she was 18 years old, a habit she had picked up from her father. Usually her entries were functional notes about the day, challenges faced, problems solved. But tonight, she wrote something different. "Today I learned why I became a soldier," she wrote. "Not for medals or promotions, not for rank or recognition. I became a soldier to make a difference, to protect people, to serve. And today, for the first time, I really served. I looked into the eyes of a hungry child and I was able to put food in her belly. I watched a mother cry tears of relief, and somehow all the years of being overlooked, being underestimated, all of it suddenly made sense, because I was here. I was ready. And I could help." Sarah didn't know that the real test of her character, her courage, and her strength was still to by late April. Sarah and her team had established a routine. 3 days a week, they distributed food and basic supplies to the families in Schlossberg. 2 days a week, they conducted health assessments and worked with local authorities to identify additional needs. And the results were remarkable. Children who had been lethargic and pale began to gain color and energy. Families who had been rationing single meals began having proper breakfast and dinner. For the first time in years, Frau Hoffman reported that students were able to concentrate in class. Test scores improved. Attendance rates climbed. Sarah became known around town as the American who helped. Families would wave at her from windows. Shop owners would smile when she walked past. The children at the school treated her like a local celebrity. Private Foster had started teaching English lessons, and there was always a line of excited children hopping to participate. By early May, Sarah had received 3 formal commendations from Stuttgart Command, and Major Hendricks sent a personal email congratulating her on the success of the mission. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. And then Captain Holston arrived. He came unannounced, driving a military vehicle to the barracks on May 7th. Sarah was in the middle of cataloging the latest shipment of supplies when Sergeant Tors came running to find her. "Captain Holston is here," Tors said, slightly out of breath. "He wants to see you immediately." Sarah's stomach clenched. Halston was her commanding officer's commanding officer. His presence here could mean many things, most of them potentially problematic. She cleaned up quickly and headed to the small office they had set up in the barracks. Halston was standing with his arms crossed, looking at the supply inventory sheets Sarah had taped to the wall. He was still the same overweight, unpleasant man she remembered from Fort Bragg, but his expression was harder now, sharper. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said without turning around, "I've come to conduct an audit of this mission. Sit down." Sarah sat. Her mind was already running through possibilities, trying to figure out what could have prompted this visit. Her reports had been filed regularly, every shipment had been documented, every distribution was recorded. Everything should be by the book. "Captain," she said respectfully, "I can provide you with complete documentation of every." Halston held up a hand. "I'll be the judge of what I need. First, I want you to explain to me how you've managed to distribute 847 pounds of supplies beyond what was officially authorized. I've reviewed the inventory manifests, and the amounts you've distributed far exceed the parameters of this mission." Sarah's heart began to race, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, the parameters stated that supplies should be distributed according to minimal nutritional requirements. I interpreted that to mean—" "I don't care what you interpreted," Halston said sharply. "The mission authorization included a specific budget and specific quantities. You have exceeded both, and what's more, you've been paying for additional supplies out of military operational funds. With respect, sir, I've documented every expenditure, and every expenditure has been necessary to—" "To what?" Halston demanded, turning to face her directly. "To exceed your authority, to make decisions that weren't yours to make? Sergeant, you're a supply sergeant. Your job is to manage resources according to the parameters set by higher command. Your job is not to be a missionary." Sarah felt her jaw clench, but she kept her voice level. "These children were starving, sir." "That's not your problem," Halston said loudly. "That's the German government's problem. That's the local government's problem. You were sent here to provide minimal humanitarian assistance as directed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Minimal. Your job was to follow orders, not to play nurse and save the world." "Sir, I'm confident that if you review the mission parameters—" "I've reviewed the parameters," Halston interrupted. "And I'm telling you that you've exceeded your authority and your budget. That's not a matter for debate. What concerns me more is the pattern I'm seeing here." He moved closer to her desk, leaning forward. "I've been reading your files, Sergeant. I've been reading your evaluations. You're reliable, you do your job, but there's a pattern you consistently overstep. You make decisions above your rank. You second-guess your commanding officers. You think you know better. That's a problem in the military, Sergeant. That's exactly the kind of attitude that creates problems in a chain of command." Sarah felt something ignite inside her, but she forced it down. Getting angry would only prove his point in his mind. "I understand, sir," she said quietly. "Do you?" Halston asked skeptically. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're more interested in being a hero than in following orders. And heroes who don't follow orders create problems. They create liability, and I don't tolerate that kind of risk." He stood up and walked to the door, then paused. "Here's what's going to happen, Sergeant. I'm going to file a formal report with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You exceeded your budget by approximately 15%. You distributed supplies beyond the authorized parameters. These facts will be documented in your permanent record. More importantly, you are to cease all additional distributions immediately. You will manage only the authorized supplies at the authorized quantities for the remaining duration of this mission. Additionally, I'm relieving you of command of this team. Sergeant Torres will assume leadership of the distribution efforts. You'll remain in an advisory capacity only. This is not punishment, Sergeant. This is command correcting a situation that shouldn't have developed in the first place. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fury and hurt churning inside her. "Good," Halston said. "I'll be staying for 1 week to ensure the transition goes smoothly. After that, I'll file my report and return to Stuttgart." He left and Sarah sat alone in the office, her hands trembling. Sergeant Torres found her there 30 minutes later, tears finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "I heard," Torres said quietly. "Some of the local volunteers saw him yelling, 'Sarah, what happened?'" Sarah explained the situation to him, her voice heavy. Torres listened, and when she finished, he sat down next to her. That man is an idiot, Torres said flatly. You did everything right. You helped people who needed help. You followed the spirit of the mission even if you bent the letter of it slightly. It doesn't matter, Sarah said. He's filing a formal report. It's going to be in my permanent record. Torres stood up. Then we fight it. We document what we did, why we did it, and what the results are. We get testimonies from these families, from the teachers, from the local government. We show that what you did was not just right, it was necessary. Sarah shook her head. You can't fight your commanding officer's report, not successfully. The military doesn't work that way. But as the week went on, something unexpected happened. Word spread through Schlossberg about what had occurred. The families learned that the program was being scaled back, that the children would be receiving less food, that Sarah had been reprimanded for helping them too much. One afternoon, a small group of people came to the barracks. There was Frau Hoffmann, Herr Mueller, and a dozen parents from the community. When Sarah came outside to meet them, she found them holding papers and folders. Sergeant Mitchell, Frau Hoffmann said, her English carefully practiced and deliberate, we have written letters, many letters. We want to send them to your commanders. We want to tell them what you have done for us, what you have done for our children. Sarah felt her throat tighten. You don't have to do that. It won't help. It will help, Mueller said firmly. You do not understand, Sergeant. In Germany, we understand what it means to have your country turn away from you. We understand what it means to be forgotten. You came here, you remembered us, you saw us. You treated us like human beings worthy of help. Yes, we will write letters. You tell us where to send them, and we will send them. Over the next few days, Sarah received the letters. There were 37 of them, written in German and English, from families, teachers, business owners, and even the local priest. They told stories of children with more energy, mothers with more hope. They described Sarah not as someone who exceeded her authority, but as a soldier who understood what it meant to serve. Greta Skalls, the mother Sarah had comforted on the school steps, had written, Sergeant Mitchell has shown us that in times of darkness, there are people in the world who still choose kindness. She has restored my faith in humanity. Whatever my government does, I will never forget what she did for my family. Sarah read each letter multiple times. She kept them in a folder under her pillow. But the letters didn't change Halston's report. He filed it 3 days before his departure, claiming that Sarah had exercised poor judgment and exceeded her authority. He recommended that her next assignment should involve closer supervision and more restricted parameters. When Sarah received a copy of the report, she sat in her bunk and read it through completely, every damning word. And then, instead of breaking down, she made a decision. By late May, Sarah had developed a new plan. If she couldn't provide additional supplies through military channels, she would find other ways. She started by reaching out to contacts back in the United States. She called her father, a retired Marine colonel living in North Carolina, and explained the situation. Without hesitation, he began contacting other veterans and military families, asking them to contribute supplies for shipment to Germany. She called Major Hendricks and carefully explained that she was conducting a personal relief effort, separate from the military mission. Hendricks, who had heard through the grapevine about Halston's report, gave her full support. Do it, Hendricks said over the phone. Do it quietly, but do it. And Sarah, what you're doing is right. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Private Foster had family connections in Berlin, and she helped facilitate logistics. Sergeant Torres quietly rearranged the military supply distribution to maximize efficiency, which freed up resources that Sarah documented meticulously according to Halston's strict parameters. Within 2 weeks, Sarah had established a parallel supply network. Military supplies met the strict authorized parameters, but additional supplies, donated from American veterans, American charities, and American families who had heard about Schlossberg, were distributed separately, under the auspices of a small relief organization that Sarah created on paper. The donated supplies came in boxes addressed to the Schlossberg Community Relief Fund, and they included not just food, but other necessities. There were vitamins, school supplies, and even children's books. There was a donation from a church in North Carolina that included money, which Sarah worked with Herr Mueller to distribute as emergency assistance to families facing utility shutoffs. Halston, reviewing the books, found nothing to critique. Every military supply was accounted for according to regulations. If additional private relief was happening, well, that was outside the scope of the military mission. He couldn't do anything about it. By mid-June, Sarah and her team prepared to leave Germany. But before they departed, the town arranged a farewell gathering. It took place in the town square on a warm evening in late June. Nearly everyone in Schlossberg showed up. There was food, real German food, prepared by families who wanted to give something back to their American helpers. There were songs. The children from school sang a rendition of God Bless America that was sweet and slightly off-key and absolutely perfect. And there were speeches. Frau Hoffmann spoke about how Sarah had reminded her why she became a teacher. "I teach because I believe every child deserves hope," she said. "Sergeant Mitchell showed me that hope is not just about words. It is about action. It is about seeing suffering and choosing to do something about it." Greta Skalls spoke about her youngest daughter who had gained 10 pounds and now had energy to play like a normal child. "The doctors said she was malnourished," Greta said, tears streaming down her face. "They said she might have permanent damage, but because of Sergeant Mitchell, she is healthy now. She is going to be okay. I do not have enough words to thank you." When it was time for Sarah to speak, she stood up in front of the entire town and found herself equally emotional. "When I came here," she said, her voice steady, "I thought I knew what it meant to be a soldier. I thought it meant following orders, managing resources, and completing missions. But I was wrong. Being a soldier means serving. It means looking at suffering and deciding you're going to do something about it. It means being part of a community and protecting that community. You have taught me more about what it means to serve than any military base ever could. You have taught me that sacrifice and dedication are about people, not systems. About individuals, not organizations. I came here to help you, but you have helped me far more. You have reminded me why I joined the military in the first place." After the gathering, as the sun was setting, Sarah took a long walk through the town with Frau Hoffmann. They walked past the school, past the town square, past the small shops that were still struggling but seemed somehow more hopeful than they had when Sarah arrived. "What will happen now?" Hoffmann asked. "The supplies, will they continue?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I've established contacts back in the United States. The donations will continue, and I'm working on something else. I've been in contact with military leadership about creating a formal humanitarian program for small communities like Schlossberg. I don't know if it will work, but I'm going to try." Hoffmann took Sarah's hand. "You are a good soldier, Sergeant Mitchell. You understand something that many in power do not. You understand that humanity is more important than regulations." The team departed Germany on June 30th, 2008. When they arrived back at Fort Bragg, there was supposed to be a standard debriefing and then reassignment to regular duties. Sarah expected that her career had been significantly damaged by Halston's report. She prepared herself for reassignment, limited opportunities, and the slow process of climbing out of the hole that one negative report could create in the military. What happened instead was completely unexpected. When she arrived at the barracks, there was a message waiting for her. "Report to Major Hendricks' office immediately, in full uniform." Sarah's heart sank. This was it. This was when she would find out exactly how much damage the report had done. She entered Hendricks' office to find the major sitting at her desk with a strange expression, a combination of satisfaction and controlled amusement. "Sergeant Mitchell, sit down," Hendricks said. Sarah sat, bracing herself. "I've been very interesting in the past few weeks," Hendricks continued. "I received a number of letters, official letters, from the German government, from the town of Schlossberg, from various German media outlets. Have you been monitoring German news?" "No, ma'am," Sarah said, confused. "Well," Hendricks said, "the story of what happened in Schlossberg has become something of a sensation. The German press has been covering it, and they're describing you as an example of military leadership at its finest. A soldier who understood that orders must sometimes be bent to serve a higher purpose. The German government has formally recognized your contribution to civil-military relations between our countries, and more pressingly, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have received these letters. Multiple letters from German officials expressing gratitude and concern about the criticism you received for helping a struggling community." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Ma'am, I—" "And then," Hendricks continued, "something very interesting happened. Captain Halston's report came under review, and it was discovered that his characterization of your actions was incomplete. The fact that you supplemented military supplies with privately donated materials was not actually a violation of anything. The fact that you exceeded your budget by a percentage that was well within normal operational fluctuations, not a violation. And the fact that you did all of this while maintaining perfect compliance with military regulations regarding the official supply distribution. Also not a violation. Hendricks leaned back in her chair, a slight smile playing at her lips. The conclusion of the review was that Captain Halston's report was based on a misinterpretation of the mission parameters and an overly rigid reading of regulations that were designed to provide flexibility, not restriction. His report is being amended. Your personnel file will include both his original report and a detailed correction explaining that his criticisms were without merit. "Ma'am, I don't. What does this mean?" Sarah asked. "It means," Hendricks said clearly, "that your career has taken a very positive turn. You're being promoted to Staff Sergeant, effective immediately. You're also being transferred to a new assignment. The Army has decided to create a humanitarian logistics division designed to handle exactly these kinds of situations, where communities are in crisis and military resources can make a meaningful difference. They want you to lead it." Sarah felt her eyes welling with tears. I don't know what to say." "You can say yes," Hendricks said. "But Sarah, I need to be clear about something. This isn't just about Germany. This is about a fundamental shift in how the military approaches these situations. And it's only happening because of what you did. Because you had the courage to do what you thought was right, even when someone in power was telling you it was wrong." Hendricks stood and extended her hand to Sarah. Sarah stood and shook it, her mind reeling. "You were right to trust your instincts," Hendricks said quietly. "That's what this whole thing has been about. Leadership isn't about following rules blindly. It's about understanding the purpose behind those rules and being wise enough to know when serving that purpose requires bending those rules. You understood the purpose of that mission, to help people in crisis. And you did it. Congratulations, Sergeant." Over the next 3 years, from 2008 to 2011, Sarah built the Humanitarian Logistics Division from the ground up. The program was officially called the Military Community Aid and Logistics Program, or MCALP, but internally people just called it Sarah's program. The concept was straightforward but revolutionary within military structure. Military resources and logistics expertise would be used to identify and assist civilian communities facing humanitarian crises. It wasn't combat relief. It wasn't disaster response in the traditional sense. It was specifically designed to help communities that were economically devastated, forgotten by government systems, and desperately in need. Sarah selected her team carefully, looking for soldiers who understood that service meant more than following orders. She chose people who could work independently, think creatively, and most importantly, who could treat civilian populations with dignity and respect. The program expanded rapidly. After Schlossberg came similar assignments to communities in Poland, Romania, and Ukraine. In each location, Sarah implemented the same approach: assess needs, identify resources, work with local leaders, and exceed expectations without breaking regulations. By 2010, the program had served more than 4,000 families across Europe. Children who would have faced malnutrition had received proper food. Elderly people who would have frozen in winter had received assistance with heating. Communities that had been forgotten had been remembered. But success, Sarah was learning, often came with its own complications. In November 2010, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything. It was from a journalist named Thomas Beck, who worked for a major German newspaper. He explained that he wanted to do a feature story on Sarah and the work she had done. Sarah initially declined. She wasn't interested in publicity, but Beck was persistent. "The story people need to hear," Beck said over the phone, "is not about your success. It is about something that happened in Schlossberg that I think you should know about. I've been investigating Captain Halston's conduct, and I've discovered something very troubling." Sarah listened as Beck explained what he had found. During the time when Halston was criticizing Sarah for exceeding her budget, he had been embezzling military supply funds through falsified reports. Thousands of dollars. When the audit that corrected Sarah's reputation had been conducted, it had uncovered Halston's corruption as well. He was court-martialed, Beck explained. But quietly. The military wanted to minimize the scandal. He received a dishonorable discharge and spent time in a military prison. He was released in 2009, and now he's disappeared. The military lost track of him. Sarah felt her stomach twist. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Beck said, "I want to write the true story, not just about what you did in Schlossberg, but about what happened afterward. about how a corrupt officer tried to destroy you because you challenged his authority, about how you were vindicated, and about how people like him are still in the system, still abusing power. Sarah's immediate reaction was to refuse. She didn't want to dredge up the past. She didn't want to relive the pain of those accusations. She didn't want to be part of exposing anyone, even someone as corrupt as Halston.